As a medium teeming with untapped, yet-to-be-filled potential, I get really excited when I stumble across a VR game that attempts to push boundaries, to tackle gameplay that may be difficult to get right in a headset. EVERSLOGHT is one of those titles, and both on its Steam page and on developer MobX Games' website, the stated goal is clear: a VR game for hardcore players, intense, active, and highly mobile. Deep in the semi-mechanical dungeons of a forgotten city, you are trapped in seemingly endless servitude to enigmatic overlords with an insatiable thirst for blood. Descend into the depths, defeat the vicious denizens therein, and offer their blood as tribute. Blood for the blood gods that may even buy you your freedom too. Releasing into early access July 2021, EVERSLOGHT is pretty bare bones at the moment. It has a clear direction and solid foundation, but lacks color and variety. When at its best, EVERSLOGHT is exactly as exciting as some of this footage looks, a breakneck hack and slash evocative of Doom and God of War. Using a combination of your sword, grappling hook, wrist cannon, and, if the situation becomes dire enough, fist, you run around corridors, slicing and dicing enemies, on your way to a level-ending finale that pits you against a massive horde of enemies in a locked arena. Offer enough blood, and you'll collect skill points that upgrade anything from melee damage to movement speed and your grappling hook's cooldown. EVERSLOGHT can be legitimately exhilarating. Enemies relentlessly jump and sprint after you, rushing your position. Mobility is your saving grace, and stopping is a death sentence. So you're escaping with your grappling hook 1 second, dodging enemies the next, and slaying them in droves shortly after. Cue a rip-roaring soundtrack that, during combat, wears Mick Gordon inspirations on its sleeve and elevates the mystery of the dungeon during slower moments, and the kind of experience EVERSLOGHT wants to be and is working toward shines through. But atop EVERSLOGHT's solid foundation is a lot of underdeveloped ideas. The blueprint for a roguelike is present: cyclical one-life attempts that, over time, upgrade your weapons and character stats. What isn't there, at least in EVERSLOGHT's current state, is the intrigue, variability, or difficulty of an actual roguelike, all of which is coupled with an overemphasis on combating big groups of enemies rather than difficult or synergistic groups of enemies. The dungeon itself is monochromatic, containing the same mixture of orange, yellow, and red throughout. When the game starts, there's a really cool intro sequence where you enter the city and fight through its ruins. Along the way, there are all kinds of interesting and creepy environmental details that generate real mystery. It brought to my mind the first few hours exploring Yharnam and Bloodborne. As you're funneled into the dungeon and the game actually starts, that sensation fades away. The dungeon, with its sameness in color and structure, melds together and becomes less interesting. Both in EVERSLOGHT's architecture and combat, there's not a lot to see nor experience. Considering the high degree of movement both in your jumps and dodges and with your grappling hook, you'd think there'd be sections with more dynamic and challenging paths or even secret routes. But as it stands, dungeons are mostly a long walk from one room to the next. There are occasionally somewhat hidden rooms you'll need to keep an eye out for, but chances are, if not at least in my experience, what you'll find there isn't super important or interesting. Besides enemies, dungeons also have pots filled with gold and chests that may carry a new sword, but these things feel compulsory rather than exciting. If you're victorious in the ending fight, you're rewarded with a powerful, rare weapon, so powerful that common weapons you find throughout the dungeon aren't useful. The gold you get from smashing pots and boxes and the like, you'll spend between blood runs to repair and upgrade weapons in order to keep them on par with your level. This all means that when you find a powerful weapon, likely at the end, a lot of future weapons have no use. That is until the next time you find a rare weapon. Now, you can spend gold at the weapons store to get a random rare weapon, but this doesn't guarantee it'll be better than the weapons you found, and it's expensive. Take a chance on a few weapons here, and you might need to grind a bit in order to repair and upgrade the weapons you prefer. So chests aren't exciting, because their contents, the vast majority of the time, are either useless swords or gold, which you'll likely spend to maintain weapons. This wouldn't be so much of a problem if EVERSLOGHT weren't so easy, and if death carried heavier consequences. In my 9 hours of EVERSLOGHT, I've died once, excluding the intro sequence. You don't lose anything after death, the blood run is just cut short, and you're sent to the sacrificial chamber with without the opportunity to open the end-of-level purple chest. This isn't to say Everslot's combat isn't fun, it is, and there's some strategy involved. Killing enemies with melee attacks generates blood capsules stored in your gauntlet. It takes blood capsules to shoot and to heal, so it's important to keep your sword swinging and reserve capsules for healing and crowd control. Use your gun too much and you can't heal. Constantly heal and you can't use your gun. It's a nice little dynamic. Combat itself, though, is highly repetitive, more concerned with throwing big mobs of enemies at you rather than enemies that shake up pacing or force you to switch up tactics. Fights get stale and combat becomes as mentally tiring as it is physically. Unlike many other VR games where damage is dealt from range of motion, force of motion is what matters in Everslot, meaning the speed at which you swing changes how much damage you do. It's a style I'm open to, but with force of motion, I think combat really needs to be seamless and precise, and Everslot doesn't always feel that way. There are times swings don't seem to register, or shooting the grappling hook on an archer might clip you through them rather than knock them back and make them open to an attack. Those types of things are to be expected in early access, and they really didn't massively detract from my experience, but Everslot's structural shortcomings are what bother me the most, and most where the game needs to grow. What makes developing a VR game like Everslot tricky, at least from an audience standpoint, is accessibility. Physically demanding VR games with intense locomotion are, by their very nature, going to close themselves off to audiences that can't handle them. For smaller developers, and maybe even larger ones, this means developing an intense VR experience can be risky, since you're limiting the kind of audience and market your game can reach right out of the gate. That's the trade-off of creative VR development that pushes boundaries and tests limits. The most important thing, though, is that Everslot works. The locomotion, intense combat, and constant moving combine to form an experience that does not exist anywhere else in gaming, even if it needs fine-tuning. And while it certainly has room to grow, much like VR itself, I'm rooting for Everslot to keep pushing boundaries, build on its foundation, and fulfill its potential.